My op-ed today at HartmannReport.com is titled, "When was bribery of politicians legalized in America?" And, I started asking this question, why don't we have gun control in the United States? We're literally the only developed country in the world that does not have gun control, that doesn't have reasonable limitations on guns. We have reasonable limitations on owning cars, but not guns. Why? Well, it turns out it's because our Supreme Court, or more correctly, 5 Republicans on our Supreme Court, legalized bribery. Now, they didn't legalize the bribery of a store clerk or a bank teller or people who work for airlines. If somebody slips you on a flight in exchange for $100 in their back pocket, or you pay a store clerk to look the other way while you shoplift something, you can still go to jail for that. And it wasn't the bribery of judges or police officers or people who work in government offices. That's still very much a crime. Not even international bribery. If you're doing business, if you're a business person doing business outside the United States and you bribe somebody, you can still be prosecuted inside the United States for that. No, the Supreme Court only legalized bribery for one very narrow group of people: politicians. That's it. Now, we have laws against bribery because bribery destroys trust. Bribery disrupts society. Bribery hurts us, not just as a society, but individually as well. We don't want bribery happening. We don't want, for example, drug companies paying off doctors to push pills. We saw that when the Sackler family was hustling OxyContin. And, we saw the literally hundreds of thousands of unnecessary deaths. And it cost us billions of dollars. We don't want rich people being able to pay off judges so they can avoid prosecution. We want the Jeffrey Epsteins and the Bernie Madoffs, and even back in the day, the old John Dillingers, to be prosecuted. We don't want them to be able to bribe their way out by paying off a jury member. We now have almost complete paralysis in our political system. And we can track it all back to 2 Supreme Court decisions in 1976 and 1978, Buckley versus Vallejo and First National Bank versus Bellotti, in which the Supreme Court ruled for the first time in its history, in the history of the United States, frankly, for the first time in the history of any developed country in the world, that when a billionaire or a company bribes a politician, that is no longer corruption, that is no longer bribery, that is now called free speech. And those 2 decisions in 76 and 78 fueled the Reagan Revolution in 1981. And we have had political gridlock now for 40 years. I mean, this is serious stuff. We can't get gun legislation passed. We can't get education legislation passed. We can't get Social Security stabilized and expanded. We can't get Medicare, unprivatized. I mean, the bribery is just left and right. And, we got pharmaceuticals showing greater profits than ever before in the history of America. And Medicare literally is forbidden by law from negotiating drug prices. Why? Because politicians were bribed by the drug companies. It's that simple. We have $2 trillion in student debt in the United States. When we know that the GI Bill, free college for everybody, or at least everybody who served in World War II, produced $7 in added tax revenue for every $1 that it cost us. Every other country in the world knows this. You have free college education or close to it, low cost, reasonable, affordable in every country, every developed country in the world. Why not here? Well, because our politicians are being bribed. I mean, before this era of bribery, the era of bribery began in 1980 in a big way. The decisions were 76 and 78, and then, of course, the Supreme Court doubled down, tripled down in 2010 with Citizens United. But before that, we did so much. We passed the right to unionize, which built America's middle class. We passed unemployment insurance and workplace safety rules to protect workers. We passed Social Security to end poverty among the elderly, Medicare to provide health security for the elderly. That top tax rate of 74 to 91% before the era of bribery kept wages strong for working people and prevented an explosion of corrosive wealth inequality. We didn't get our first billionaire until after the Reagan Revolution. We built colleges that were free and affordable. We built gleaming new nonprofit hospitals, the world's finest system of public schools, roads, bridges, rail, airports from coast to coast. We cleaned up the environment with the EPA. We cleaned up politics with the Federal Election Commission. We cleaned up corporate backroom deals with the SEC. We outlawed banks from gambling with our deposits with Glass-Steagall. And then it all came to a screeching halt with the Reagan Revolution. Why? Because bribery had been legalized by the Supreme Court. And thus, today, our nation's infrastructure is crumbling. 40 years of disinvestment and neglect. When the originalists, so-called, on the Supreme Court made this ruling, these Republicans on the Supreme Court back in 76 and 78, and Lewis Powell, by the way, of Powell Memo fame, wrote that decision in 78, the Buckley decision that gave corporations that power. They said that they were channeling the founders. We know what the founders said. Well, let's hear what one of the founders said. This is Thomas Jefferson. He was president, and he wrote the Declaration of Independence. In 1816, in a letter to Samuel Kercheval, he said, those seeking profit. Now, keep in mind, the Supreme Court, when they ruled that bribery of politicians was legal, said they were channeling the founders. Here's probably the first among equals of the founders. Quote, those seeking profits, were they given total freedom, would not be the ones to trust to keep government pure and our rights secure. Indeed, it has always been those seeking wealth who were the source of corruption in government. I mean, the Pennsylvania Constitution that was written in 1776 said, quote, an enormous proportion of property vested in a few individuals is dangerous to the rights and destructive to the common happiness of mankind. And therefore every free state hath a right by its laws to discourage the possession of so much property. But we got it anyway. No other developed country in the world has this problem. We are the only one that allows politicians to be bribed. And thus, nothing is happening. And those bribed politicians are now, they're going on Fox News going, well, 9/11, we didn't ban airplanes because they're taking bribes from the gun industry. They say, well, we don't think that we should mess with Medicare. Why? Because they don't want them to negotiate drug prices. They're taking money from the pharmaceutical industry.